An archaic but effective way of shrinking sheet metal with hand tools is with a pronged tool like this called a tucking tool or folder. I've got this one mounted on a piece of square tubing, and then it fits down into a tapered pocket on the stump. I believe a fellow named Randy Ferguson came up with that idea. I remember seeing a picture of his stump somewhere. Anyway, it seemed like a great idea, and in practice has turned out to be really useful, very efficient with space. So the way this tool works, you slip your sheet metal in between the prongs. The first direction doesn't matter which way you go, but you put it in there between those prongs and you twist it like so. Then you lift it up and bring it down on the adjacent prong and twist it back the other way. Like that. I typically will revisit the first position, and then that gives you a wrinkle in the side of the piece that then we can hammer down to shrink the metal. I'm going to put a few of these in the side of this piece in the areas indicated by my paper pattern. To reiterate what I'm going for here, I put a tuck in each of the areas that my paper pattern indicated I needed to shrink. So there's the wrinkles in the side of the panel. And I'm trying to trap these wrinkles so that the metal gets shorter in this dimension and thicker. And so I'm trading that length for thickness. That's going to get me closer to the finished top panel on my track nose. When I go to hammer these down, I can trap them more effectively if I have a hollow and a stump. That's my favorite way to do it. I think of this as maybe a medieval cereal bowl shape right there. And so I'm trying to situate the panel in such a way that when I hit this metal down, it will have no other option other than to collapse into itself and be trapped by the stump. Yes, it certainly works if I do it on a table, but it'll work even better the more I can trap the sides of that metal to keep it from just flattening out. Hammers that would work satisfactorily for this process, I could use a rubber mallet, one of my favorites. I usually will shape one side of these to a crown and leave the other side flat for when I want to hit on the outside of a panel. I could use a plastic teardrop mallet. They don't have any mass, and so you're not going to stretch anything, but if you're trying to shrink, as here, this is a good option. It fits down in a little corner, which is kind of convenient sometimes. And I could certainly use a steel hammer if that's all I had. I just would want to make sure that the shape of the face fits the panel that I'm working with. This is a ball peen hammer that has been caressed with a belt sander to give it a nice crowned face on one side. So any of these would be acceptable options for shrinking these tucks. A couple of points I want to bring up with tuck shrinking. You may have noticed that I started with one blow out on the outside of the panel and then moved up deeper in the panel and worked my way out to the edge. I believe that when you work in that order, by hitting this outside of the panel first, you create a little work hardened point that is less likely to spread out, and then it helps you trap this metal, so you're chasing this wrinkle into a dead end here, and that helps this shrink more effectively. And the edge of this panel definitely shrunk with just those 4 blows. Another point I wanted to bring up is what happens if your tuck wants to go over sideways, as they do sometimes. So for example, this is a pretty good looking tuck. It's really abrupt. The more abrupt it is, the better you're going to be able to trap it until such a point as it starts to fold over. And at that point, you need to stop immediately and correct the problem. This is about as steep as you can get away with being able to shrink. I'm going to hit it and fold it over a little bit so it's gone too far, and then I'll demonstrate how to correct the problem. The best way to fix the problem is find a clean edge somewhere on your stump and line up the edge of the stump with the wrinkle that's being problematic, and just drive that metal away so that it unwrinkles the edge enough that it allows you to hammer it back out. Here's the first test fit after shrinking. I would say that made some good headway for not a lot of work. The order of operations on this piece definitely isn't going to matter. I could have started by stretching the middle, but I went ahead and did some shrinking on the sides because I knew that would probably make some pretty good headway right off the bat. What it's telling me now is either I need to shrink those edges a lot more, or I could raise this center. Shrinking with hand tools is going to be a lot harder than stretching, and so you will tend to gravitate towards stretching for that reason. And therefore, if I hit this area with a big hammer into a soft surface like a sandbag or a shot bag, that's really quickly going to allow this piece of metal to drape over the model. If I haven't mentioned it already, I plan to do the shaping on the piece, and then if people are interested, I can go through the making of the various tools. I'm trying to do it with the least amount of tools possible, so that if you're stranded under the ongoing stay-at-home orders and so forth, that you can still have some fun, and just feels good to swing a hammer. So for the next phase, we need to stretch this piece of metal into a soft surface. A sandbag would work. I'll show how to make one of those in another video, most likely, or a shot bag, anything that is available. Hammers that would work for this operation, certainly a glorious Viking Marauder hammer like this would be nice. Not everybody has one of those. A ball peen hammer that has been lovingly shaped with a belt sander or otherwise to give it a more crowned head than it would come with normally would also be acceptable. The only thing that you're giving up with a Viking Marauder hammer versus a ball peen hammer is this one has a little bit deeper head, and so it fits down into a panel as the panel gets more shape, whereas the ball peen hammer is a little more limited that way. But if you're stranded, you'll do the best you can with what you've got, and this will certainly work. Another of my favorite tools is this beast. Now, I realize that a steel handle will transfer any vibrations and so forth into your arm, and so it's not something you would want to swing all day, every day, but for the few times that you need it, it really performs well. This is a high pressure cylinder cap that I got at a farm supply store here locally. The high pressure cap seems to be a little bit longer, and so gives you a little bit more reach than perhaps the low pressure cap. So that's why I typically gravitate towards that. The handle is 3/4 inch tubing that I got at the same farm supply, and it's 12 inches long. That seems to be the right, just the right length for being able to accelerate this head into your target. The fact that the face is so large tends to leave a pretty nice finish, and so I wouldn't underestimate this tool. Even with all of the pandemic and so forth, you can probably, if you can get out of your house, you can probably get the materials necessary to make one of these. During that last round of hammering, I used a wood mallet. I got this one at the local hardware store for I think $12 or $15. I like the wood mallet because it has enough mass that if you wanted to stretch annealed aluminum into a soft surface, you can. You can also just smooth out wrinkles without leaving any marks. You can trap any kind of a wrinkle like a tuck, and if you can trap it successfully into a stump or against a flat surface, you can shrink it. So it kind of has magical properties in that it will do everything that you ask of it, whether that's shrinking, stretching, or just trading a high for low that I would call smoothing something out. And so in that last round of hammering, I was flattening out some of those wrinkles against the stump using the wood mallet. I wouldn't have to use a wood mallet. Certainly I could have used any hammer, even the steel hammer, as long as I didn't hammer too hard or with too much force. Checking the piece on the model, it drapes even further. At this point I need to just feel the panel against the model and try to determine where does it seem to be rubbing. I can feel there seems to be a little ridge on either side on where the metal has this rather tight radius, or excuse me, the model has a very tight radius here, but the metal is still very flat. I haven't done anything to that area of the metal yet, so I anticipate doing some hammering right along those two radii, and that should help allow the rear portion to drape even further. And then when I do that, I'll be, again, feeling for any kind of rubbing in here, which would tell me that needs to be raised. And I can always smooth it out against the stump, which just by removing bumps is going to allow it to fit a little bit better.